Welcome, travelers. I'm Josh.
I'm Glenn.
And I'm Lee Wanika. And this is Tabletop Journeys, where we will be your not-so-humble guides on the quest for RPG adventures.
Here at Tabletop Journeys, we are all devoted role players and storytellers at heart, and we absolutely love sharing our passion with you. On our show, we feature diverse tabletop RPG systems, demonstrating them through actual plays and breaking down the rules to provide you with tips, tools, and techniques to help you navigate them. We also love bringing the content creators behind these games into the studio to give you a peek behind the curtain with relevant and insightful interviews.
Let us help you get the most out of your story, no matter what game world or system you're playing, because detailed settings, heroic characters, diverse NPCs, and a focus on story over rules can make any campaign legendary. And now, here's a message from friends of the show.
Have you been looking for a break from the drudgery of the real world? What if the future wasn't so bleak? What if someone was to save us all? How would that look?
I must know, does your microwave gun go ding when it's done shooting?
Well, you're in luck, because Cybertopia is a rules-light TTRPG actual play that explores just such a reality.
We've got this disco ball, which is pretty cool. We've got these two drones flying around in here, dodging in out of the smoke.
Check us out on your podcast app of choice, and hear our rolling cast of 16 fantastic players take on weird and wild missions that the corporate overlords need taken care of for totally altruistic and benevolent reasons.
Okay, this time it's serious. I would like to turn my hacking hat backwards.
Welcome, everybody, to tonight's episode. So really excited for today's guest to be on the show. This is an episode that we've been trying to go ahead and put together for a while. Really glad that all of our schedules have finally lined up to go ahead and make it happen. But before we introduce them tonight, Mr. Miller, Mr. Myers, good evening. It feels like it's been a while since we've sat down to go ahead and do this, but it really hasn't. We're just really busy.
I mean, we did have last week off. It's been a little bit of a gap.
Yeah.
Between real life, game life, podcast life, we are all doing so many things. It is crazy scheduling. Like, I look at my calendar sometimes and I'm like, no human being should have a calendar. This is really weird. Like, they just really shouldn't. It's not cool. It's intimidating.
Oh, it's bad. It's bad for the stress level sometimes. You're looking at it and you're just, woo.
Yeah. Well, I normally ask you guys for your updates first, and skipping over mine because my life is revolving around my 17-month-old. But I actually have a really exciting update tonight that I want to go ahead and share. Because
Josh, you go first, bro.
I am going to go first because for the first time since this podcast began, if not shortly after the podcast began, I ran a game in person with people. Like,
holy crap.
Digitally, it wasn't a game that was related to the podcast. It was just a game with people. And it was for fun. Yeah. It was two brand new players. One of them had played once a bazillion years ago in high school, back when Rocks were soft and you guys were already DMing. And the other one had never played before. In fact, his only exposure to D&D or role-playing games at all was he played a lot of Elden Ring and thought that Dungeons & Dragons would sound an awful lot of fun. And it was a blast. We're running through Dragons of Stormwreck Isle, and now it's one of the players, his older son, is going to be joining us next time around, and then they are both amenable to basically, once they go through the beginner adventure here and get the rules under their hands a little bit more, expanding into a bigger group, which has always been the goal. I am just really pumped that I got to go ahead and do this. As you can see behind me, the chaos is partially related because I'm slowly beginning to unpack more of my terrain and stuff now that I have space to go ahead and put it up. And now I'm excited that I'm going to actually be able to use some of these physical things that have been plaguing my office for years. Yeah, just really excited, and it went fabulously. I'm really happy to be running in person again. It was a really long time.
When I have spent most of this year running at conventions so I could run live, and as much as I love running digital games, and I will continue to do so because the people I get to play with, I would never be able to get them all in one place together at the same time because of how far apart we all live. So I love the virtual and digital space for that purpose. But the reality is there's something immeasurably cool, comforting, and taking me back about being in person, going to conventions, sitting around with people who are ostensibly strangers, but seeing all the familiar faces at the dealer tables because I'm going to the third or fourth convention in a row amongst the circle of convention goers and dealers at the tables. And they actually ran a convention that I couldn't go to, actually right near where you are, Josh, last weekend.
Yep.
And some of my friends were there from conventions, and it's like, this is awesome. I just love that community feel I get by going in person. I was able to play at a game, which I don't get to do as often, in person as well last weekend or weekend before last. And a brand new system I've never played before in Warhammer 40K. And I played the miniatures game, but I had never played the TTRPG. So
nice.
It was a great experience. Like we always say, playing a new game is a good way to see the things you like, be able to bring in kind of new things. And it was me sitting at a table with a good friend. It was just a grand time. In person, absolute A's all across the board. So glad that you got a chance to run like that and have some fun doing it.
So,
and absolutely, I was just going to throw on there real quick. I totally feel you on the live in person, but also on the just for fun. Because sometimes we get into so many games that we're doing because it's part of the podcast, because we're on an AP, because we're on a stream. And I don't mean that to sound like it's bad, because it's not. We still have a huge amount of fun, but there's something different about sitting down and just playing with friends with no agenda. Beyond, let's have a good time. I got to do that this past week also. Pretty awesome to get to just sit down and have a good time with our friends and family and kids.
The small bit of trivia that some of our listeners may not know, and I'm not sure that any of you guys know either, but Warhammer Fantasy, actually, Lee and Nico, was my very first role-playing game way back when I was still wet behind the ears. I played Warhammer Fantasy for a long time before I ever played D&D, actually. So
I did know that because if I recall correctly, episode 1, when we did backgrounds, you and I gave our history, and I remember you saying that. So that was the first time I've heard you say it, and I want to say about a year and a half after that, you mentioned it one other time.
I'm sure I probably mentioned it.
Deep listeners to this show will know that information, but I love the fact that you bring it up. And it was actually in my head as I was playing. I'm like, I'm finally catching up to Josh. So let's get into today, because I've been super excited for a very long time since this hit the idea board. And wow, so excited. Josh, take it away.
Yeah. Absolutely, yes. Listeners out there, hopefully their name is no stranger to you. We have got the illustrious, the famous, I'm watching them blush now, Lin Codega. Welcome to Tabletop Journeys. We are so very excited to have you here tonight for an interview. So,
hello.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Yeah, I don't know if I'm definitely not famous, but I am.
Oh, you are.
Infamous? I'm very uncomfortable with that.
I will define famous in this way. If you put your name into a Google search, and you, the person, are the first name in that list, you are famous.
Yeah.
In defense of that, I don't think anyone else has my name. So I might have just staked it out. Actually, no. I think that there's a South American ballet dancer that's named Lin Codega.
Okay, that's very cool, first of all. But second of all, that's a real rough criteria, Leonika, because I'm not the only Josh Newton who's a bass player that lived in Boston. So that's really
a tough criteria.
Yeah, the criteria. But if you would if for somehow some of our listeners don't know who you are, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
No, I want to remain in obscurity forever.
All right, well, it's been a wonderful evening talking to you. Have a great night.
It's been great, guys. I'm leaving. You'll never find me alive. So hi, my name is Lin Codega, or my full name is Linda. I go by Lin online. I am a journalist. I cover tabletop role-playing games and more broadly entertainment when the whim strikes and the money flows. And I covered the OGL problem.
Kerfluffle.
Kerfuffle.
I heard you call it a fiasco in an older interview from about a year ago.
Yeah, it was a bit of a fiasco. I think that's a good way to put it. It was just
Debacle
sort of like a series of bad
my
decisions.
Question about it.
Yeah.
Debacle. Yeah. Yes. So, in a series of increasingly bad decisions, Wizards of the Coast attempted to change the OGL in 2023. And I was one of the journalists that really was able to chase that down and report on it thoroughly. So that was really how I got my name. Really is tied into tabletop and role-playing. But I had been writing about role-playing games for about 3 or 4 years beforehand, which is probably how I got my dirty little paws on the OGL in general. So I've been writing about advances to game culture, where we're going right, where we're going wrong, where we've stagnated. I've written about indie games. I write about what play means as far as like self-exploration. Yeah, so I write a lot about tabletop role-playing games, and I'm currently writing full-time for Rascal, which is a tabletop role-playing game site that I co-founded with Chase Carter and Rowan Zioli. And that's really fun right now. I'm having a good time. And that's who I am. I'm a journalist and a writer.
Fabulous.
I believe you left out game designer as well. I got a question about that for later, but we'll get there because
we get there. Yeah.
You have some stuff that I'm pretty interested in. That goes as well.
All right, gentlemen, I think it is time for initiative. So fan roll dice to the ready. Let us see.
Do I have to roll too? I have one.
Oh, man. If you want to ask us, we very rarely get asked questions by our guests. If you want in on this, Lynn, absolutely.
Happily. Yeah. I'm running on an 8 right now.
I've got a 10.
Big money, no whammies. 7.
Ooh, I'm first then. I got a 12.
Right. Yeah, wow, so Lynn, you get to ask us.
The microphone is yours. All right.
Yeah. When did you guys first decide that you wanted to make your conversations public?
Oh, wow.
I would say sometime in the neighborhood of 45 minutes after Josh and I met. We're going back to 1990. Yeah. I would say very early on, maybe a little bit later than that if I'm being truly honest, but I think we were sitting on some friend's couch, probably at the center of the universe, what we call our college friends pad, where we all crashed and hung out and all kinds of fun shenanigans and debauchery.
Cold.
Yeah, but at some point, somebody like turned to us, or there was a conversation about, all you guys ever do is talk about this. And we had said, someday we ought to do a podcast about this. And we would toy around with it or do a podcast in general, especially in the early aughts after we had been out of college and really working full time and starting to raise families. My previous friendship with Glenn had connected Glenn with Josh, so the three of us would hang out all the time. We just really got to a point where we liked the way we talked about things. Even when we disagreed, there is a way that we would allow other people. Our conversations weren't about forcing each other to agree. It was about being heard, allowing each other to be heard, and walking away edified from the process. And we really wanted to do that. We toyed around with doing it about politics for a while. We talked about other things, but after 2016, we just said, F politics. There's zero fun about that. Let's do something that we could enjoy. And when the pandemic hit, or just actually before the pandemic by a few months.
No, it was November of 2020 is when we started.
Yeah, November 20. Okay, so it was into the pandemic. It was like, we should do this on, Josh said it. He's like, we should do this on D&D. And I'm like, yes, when do we start? And that was the deal.
Was it? What a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really, so I was going to say much shorter. We realized that we were going to make our conversations public when we both realized that we couldn't shut the hell up. And really, I mean, we've been having these conversations on people's couches for the better part of decades.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So
cool.
What a great question, though. That's not a story that we tell very often. It rears its head from time to time, but it's not very often that we actually get the chance to go ahead and talk about that. So
it's almost like I'm a professional.
You might think.
No way.
I trust me, I'm taking notes on how you take notes. That's what's happening now. I am trying to learn.
All right. I think that makes me next with a 10. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in here to my list of questions. And so, Lin, you mentioned Rascal News at the very top of the show. I want to hear a little bit and have you share a little bit about what Rascal News is and what Rascal News is trying to do. And then specifically, what led you to Rascal News? What led you to going out on your own like that?
Sure. Rascal News is an independent news outlet that specifically covers tabletop role-playing games. We are fully reader supported. We do not run ads. We do not take sponsorships. And we are currently, again, just reader supported. It's just a subscription model to allow people to support us and show that they like the work we do and they think it's interesting and also important to have that kind of fifth estate within tabletop. It's a rapidly growing industry and it doesn't have a lot of oversight, and it's really important to keep safe in a lot of ways. So that's Rascal News. We write reviews and criticism and blogs and investigations and reports and interviews and basically anything that you would think would go onto a news site goes on to Rascal. We even have done like a couple satire pieces, which are very fun. I did a blog on how to start game design discourse. The last bit of advice was don't do it. Was please don't. Like how to start it, just don't. Like please, like, it'll happen on its own. You don't need help. And that was
throw a D20 into a crowded room and discourse will begin. You have no effort needed.
It was a lie. It was just like, oh God, it happens automatically. Yeah, and Chase did a great satire because it was April Fool's Day, so we all put in like our satire pitches. So I did how to start game design discourse. Chase's was really funny. It was reviews of 1-star reviews on Amazon.com. So it was like he pulled like 1-star reviews of like, Catan and Dungeons and Dragons and just riffed on it. It was really funny. So we do stuff like that. We don't take ourselves too seriously all of the time, and we take ourselves seriously when it matters. And yeah, we also have an announcement section, which is open to the public and totally free to use and to view. And it's press releases from across tabletop, which we are offering as like a free service because discoverability in tabletop is really low. So we're just offering it as kind of a way to give back to the community and have that like value add without necessarily burdening people who are trying to just be creative and make their games. Yeah. Or APs or charity streams or whatever. Yeah. It's open to anything as long as it's tabletop related. And that's
as a group
news.
As a group that is putting the finishing touches on book number 4. 4 is 5. I've lost count now. I think it's as a group that's getting ready to put our finishing touches on book number 4 that was on Kickstarter last fall, I appreciate the fact that you're doing a free service because visibility is hard. Yeah.
And there are certainly some folks who do not have the content creator's best interest in mind versus when it comes to what they promise to be able to deliver versus what they are actually able to deliver.
Especially small creators like us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fairly common in any industry, but it feels very prevalent in tabletop just because literally everyone's a small creator unless you are Dungeons & Dragons, Paizo, or Monty Cook. Everyone else is small. Yeah.
I personally loved the announcement section just for a quick throw out to Big Adventure Game. Because as I was reviewing Rascal News getting ready for this interview, I saw that Alex from Big Adventure Game has an actual play open casting call for people who want to come on and be part of helping him develop Big Adventure Game through an AP. Might throw my hat in the ring. But part of the reason that's cool for us, Lin, is because at the moment on our show right now, we're airing our actual play we did as a playtest with them and an interview. And we're about to record our overall thoughts episode that comes after all of that, where we talk about the actual play and the game and how cool it was. So just the fact that I can already see from people I know things on there that would make a difference, that's fantastic.
Yeah, hopefully it does. Like I said, because we are trying to remain, we're treating it like a classified section in a lot of ways, where we are not editorializing anything. We are not like the Rascals are not editorializing anything. We're not touching it. Like the edits we make are like, oh, this link is broken, we'll fix it. It's small that it's like that, but nothing is fundamentally changed. So we're really hoping that it benefits the community and the community wants it to continue because that's what it's for. So that's Rascal news, like a really big overview of Rascal. It's just 3 tabletop journalists who have been in and around journalism and tabletop for, I've been officially a journalist for about 7 years. Chase has been doing it for about 10 and Rowan's been doing it for about 2. And we just, and this getting into why we went with Rascal is the journalism as an industry is really fraught right now. You can go online every day and see that new places have layoffs or been cut or been shuttered. And it's becoming more and more clear that the people who are in charge of most media outlets do not care about the journalists and don't actually care about the news and don't care about the writing that's happening. We realized pretty quickly that we are not valued as journalists. We're just there to make money for rich venture capitalists that don't give a shit about us. So yeah, I was laid off in October of last year, October of 2023. And I looked at my severance. Thank goodness I was part of a union. I'm still part of that union, Writers Guild of America. But thank goodness, because I got like a decent chunk of severance and I was like, okay, I have a little bit of time now. What am I going to do? And I realized I was never going to be able to find another journalism job. And my friends had just started up Aftermath, which is an independent news site about video games. And I was like, I understand that video games have a much larger audience, but if they can do it, I can do it. And it was just like that sheer boldness, right? That sheer just like, I'm going to do it too. Screw all of you. So I had some conversations with some people who encouraged me to do it. And then I recruited Rowan and then I recruited Chase and then we co-founded it together and we are all co-owners. We have a horizontal structure. So none of us are editors in chiefs or like CEOs or anything like we are technically because we still exist in the United States of America. We need those things to be like a company, yeah. But we are operating on like an anarcho-socialist model that's very flat. We all get paid the same. Yeah. So it's just the 3 of us who looked at the state of journalism and the state of tabletop journalism. We're like, we're never going to be able to get a job doing this and we're really good at it. So maybe people value that. And we're like, well, let's try
it. Cool.
What you're saying really rings true. Years ago, I shifted the bulk of my news consumption to NPR. And one of the things that I hear on those various shows, obviously during fundraising drives and things like that, is the fact that it is getting harder and harder. And I also see the layoffs in news organizations and I see the siloing of news under gigantic corporate multi-corp umbrellas that are constantly reporting about themselves to themselves while simultaneously trying to fund themselves, and just the inherent problematic nature of that. So the fact that the goal was to be and remain independent in the way that you've done it is really admirable and very much appreciated.
Yeah, independence was a huge factor in Rascal because when we were first starting, I shopped it around a little bit to investors and I was just like I could do this for 100,000 and make it last 2 years and then we'll be sustainable. We'll still do whatever. And about 3 weeks into that process, and this was like Rowan and Chase were on board at this point, we realized that investors would, even the best investor would still be a string that we didn't really want attached. So we dropped that mode of inquiry and we started thinking about how do we make this on our own? What are our goals? What do we need? How do we make this work? And how long can we suffer? How long can we last without getting like real money? And yeah, so we've just been working hard and doing our best. And it just became very clear early on that it just had to be the four of us, and that's, or the three of us, and that's it.
Yep.
Groovy. Okay. Cool. That's a fabulous answer. So that's our show for this evening. No, I'm joking. That's fantastic. Yeah,
you don't know me. Lose my number.
That's you, right? Yeah.
Get my name.
So.
Personally, I consider the year 2024 as the year that Lin Codega built, as far as the TTRPG space is concerned. Once we factor in the story you broke and the way that has impacted the gaming world, how many companies and the way they've gone to market, the new games that are coming out. We've got Daggerheart that's in its beta part 2 test right now. Tales of the Valiant just came out a week and a half ago. I'm still downloading some of the stuff and starting to pour through that. We've got so many different companies that are doing all these different things. The volume of internet folks that have gone out to try different games, that has greatly altered the scope of the gaming industry from the trajectory it was most likely on, my humble opinion. Without rehashing all the picky details of the OGL, what are your thoughts about the direction that many of the AA and AAA publishing houses are taking? And I'm really looking at some of the interesting and intriguing partnerships that have been coming out in the last month and a half or so, as far as some of these larger groups or more popular or more public groups partnering with Wizards via D&D Beyond and what that means to the overall space. We've got groups that are partnering with D&D Beyond and producing games that are, in theory, to compete with D&D 2024. And I was interested in how you think all of that kind of is working, what your thoughts are, and maybe if you put on your prognosticator hat, where do you think this might lead?
So there's 5 questions in there. I thought you only get one.
He's a master of that.
You called me out, and I frequently cheat.
It's okay. I can go through some of this with regards to MCDM's Flea Mortals and some of Coldwell Press's 5e stuff going on to D&D Beyond. There will always be people who play 5e. Like, I think 5e has really established itself in a major way. And I think that they're like, we have 5e products and we still want like people who are playing 5e to play our stuff. Let's do that and also make money. I think D&D Beyond is a moneymaker, and that's why they're doing it. Like, there's anything super deep to that one, frankly. With regards to some of the directions that the larger studios are taking, again, Kobold, MCDM, and now Darrington Press with Daggerheart, I think that it was pretty clear that when they established Darrington Press itself, they were never going to make 5e products. And I think it was just a matter of time until they made their own fantasy heartbreaker, their own tabletop game. And I'm not surprised. It's one of those things where I'm just like, this has been in the works since before the OGL stuff happened. Same thing with Cobalt, same thing with MCDM. I think everyone was starting to realize that relying on another company to facilitate the popularity of your own product was never ideal. People want to own their work. And no matter how good the OGL is as a contract, no matter how good the Creative Commons is as a contract, that's not ownership in the legal sense. And that's not ownership in an intellectual property of a company sense. So I think that they were all looking at ways to edge themselves slowly back from the cliff that is D&D. To what degree of success that they're going to do that, it remains to be seen. I think that MCDM is probably the best bet just because Matt Colville has like such a good reputation in the industry, and I think his game design sensibilities are pretty good. And I think that the way that he's streamlining it is similar to games that are already out there, which is a good thing. And I think that it's going to hit on a lot of familiar notes for a lot of people, even if they have only ever played Dungeons and Dragons. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that it's something that has been in the works for a long time. I think the OGL definitely sped things up, but I think that ultimately at the level that we're talking about, these big guys, you cannot survive as a company and just be making supplementary products. And I think that they always had ambitions of doing their own thing, and now they've just got the kick in the pants they need to actually do it.
Cool. I've often echoed a similar thought about the money piece about it. Like, to me, it was like, you got stuff, you got to sell stuff. It's a marketplace. Why not? But there's a lot of naysaying that happens in the world. And so I was interested in your take. Yeah, I'm calling you out, Josh. So I was interested in your thoughts because I was feeling a bit alone in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Companies are going to company. Companies are going to sell things, and I'm not going to hold it against them if they decide to sell on like a marketplace that's really big. Like, it's yes, you're a company. This is exactly what you should be doing. You're trying to make money. I don't know. I'm not holding them to any sort of like moral or ethical standards. It's a company. Its whole purpose is just to make money and make things. Company.
Yeah, totally. I won't rehash my feelings on Kobold. They've been well stated on this channel, but to give it the dime to though, Lynn, is that basically I have zero problem with what Kobold doing from a business point of view. I just think that they should stop calling it an original product because it's not.
Yeah, I mean,
See, for me, I'm just excited that we're going to have so many new options coming out because 5e has had the market so cornered in the fantasy tabletop role-playing space for so long. And don't get me wrong, I've said it many times. No matter what Hasbro or Wizards does, you can't take D&D away from me. I've been playing it since I was 8 years old. It will always be part of my life. But there's so many other games out there that these newcomers are taking pieces of and introducing them to like the D&D model that I'm super excited to see where it all comes out.
Yeah. Yes.
I will say that when we were in the middle of playtesting book number 3 and the OGL kerfluffle happened, that was abjectly terrifying because we had no idea what we were going to be able to do with this 150-page book that we
we'd sold a product that we now couldn't sell.
Yeah.
We never even paid for it. What were we going to do?
Yeah. Because we were not the only ones. There were so many people that like emailed me and messaged me and was like, will my product be affected? I'm like, yes. Yes, it will.
Yes, it will.
Yeah. Our Kickstarter's done. We've already been paid. We just haven't delivered yet. And it would,
It was frightening.
So, yeah. All right, Mr. Myers, I think that brings us up to you to round us out with round number 1 here.
All right. I'm going to take a step back from the current big issues in the overall space and just ask you to talk about you for a minute. I mean, it is still TTRPG related because obviously you are one of the most recognized names in tabletop role-playing game journalism in the world today. So my question is, tell us how you got here. Were you always interested in journalism? Give us a peek into your origin story, if you will.
Interesting. So the origin story that I give frequently is that my parents are both engineers who met at MIT. And for some reason, my father was like, yes, I will read my child The Lord of the Rings as their bedtime story for the first 6 years of their life.
I love it.
That's normal. That's normal. We got through the trilogy twice and The Hobbit, I think, 3 times. And I think we started on the Silmarillion, but it put me to sleep too fast, so we couldn't do that.
Nice.
So, I feel that.
That's like the nerdy origin story is that by the time I was 3 years old, I could not read fully. I could not read, but I could recite the Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven poem and turn the pages at the right time because my father had read it to me so many times.
That's nuts. Okay, cool.
And it's nuts, but that's the origin story is like Linda was raised on Lord of the Rings and Edgar Allan Poe, and that's how they got to be so weird. And yeah, I've always been...
That's one of the affirmations on my bathroom mirror is my weirdness is wonderful. You're welcome to take it.
Oh, I've embraced it. I'm just like, this is fine. It's all good. So from there, because of that, I always wanted to be a writer. And I was writing stories and poems and plays at an early age. None of it any good. Of course, I was 10. But it was good practice as a kid, just writing. I went to school for just English literature and criticism. And after school, I was like, I'm going to be a sailor. So I went up to Cape Cod and I got a job at a boatyard. Which was great.
As one does.
As one does.
Try things out.
Yeah, I grew up sailing as well. So it was one of those things where I never really wanted to go to college. And I had always wanted to just be a sailor on the world, be like a mate for hire kind of thing. And after the summer in Cape Cod, I got a job as an editor, and then I got a job as doing something at a magazine, and then I got like a real person job with benefits as like a marketer. So my path to finally ending up after that job in journalism is very long and winding and weird and doesn't really make a lot of sense because journalism is very weird right now. But basically I got a job at this like nonprofit marketing, and it was not very fulfilling for a lot of reasons. So I started learning how to pitch stories and pitch and submit my fiction stories to magazines. That's how I got started writing nonfiction articles online. And from there, I just kept building out my portfolio, and I wrote about what I liked, which, as I mentioned earlier, science fiction, fantasy, big nerd over here. So I just built out my portfolio, and eventually I got hired as another publication, and then I got hired at IO9, and yeah, that's all it was. It was just building my portfolio over the past 10 years and getting lucky at job interviews.
You may call it winding and weird, but I think that sounds fantastic, because how many of us are really coming out of high school ready to decide the fate of our future for the rest of our lives and know exactly what we're going to do? But the roads that we take to end up where we're going, they can lead anywhere. And the fact that you came all the way into a journalist role without starting out with I went to college for journalism and all of that, you built your own career is basically where I'm going with that. And being self-made is a powerful story.
Yeah, I think when you put it that way, it's very romantic in its own. But yeah, I think from my perspective, it was just sort of me bouncing around until I found something that like honored the fact that I don't like to, you know how people in sales talk about things? I don't like doing that, and I don't like hearing it. It's not my vibe. So finally, like getting to some place where I didn't have to do that, and also I could be a writer was really great. But yeah, it was always, everything that I did was always around writing and my skills telling stories, whether that's nonfiction stories or fiction stories. So yeah, long and winding, but now we're here where I'm at Rascal and my novel's coming out and everything's happening. It's all good.
I love it.
Excellent.
All right, that's going to bring us to the end of round one here. So we are going to step aside for just a minute to go ahead and pay some bills, and then we will be right back with the second part of the show with Lin Codega. So we'll be back in just a minute.
Are you going to pay my bills too? No.
Only if the ad revenue is really good.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll give you your 8%. That's fine. Yeah.
Sure. Noted.
Welcome to the middle of the show. We wanted to take a minute and thank the people who help make this show possible, our Patreon supporters. We like to shout out our adventurer level Patreons, so extra big thanks to Chad Bean, Joe Harney, Dave Rideout, Adam Scaramella, and Marty Napier. Patreon supporters get exclusive content, free copies of all of our published and unpublished game supplements, early access to episodes, and free invitations to our monthly games. You can learn more at www.patreon.com/ttjourneys.
Speaking of published material, have you checked out the supplements we have on DM's Guild? We have 2 full books, The Traveler's Guide to Collaborative World Building, The Traveler's Guide to the Multiverse, and you can combine it with all of our supplements to make your next roll legendary. Go to www.ttjourneys.com/DM's Guild for more information.
If you're looking for Tabletop Journeys swag or need a fantastic set of new dice, then you should check out the Tabletop Journeys Spring Store and our affiliate, Fanroll Dice. You can make your first purchase through Fanroll at 10% off, and every purchase helps support the show. You can learn more about that at www.ttjourneys.com/fanroll. And if you want to get some awesome t-shirts, hoodies, hats, or other gear, check out www.ttjourneys.com/swag to get redirected to our spring store. These are the same vendors that we use for our add-ons when we do Kickstarters and stand by their products.
But the best way you can support the show is by joining the conversation. Did you love one of the episodes? Did you disagree with something we said? Maybe you just want us to cover your favorite game system a little more or talk about a brand new system. Check us out at linktr.ee/TT Journeys. That's our link tree. And join the conversation.
We hope you're enjoying this week's show, so here comes the second half. Don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to us, and if your platform lets you leave a comment or a rating, why not hit the button and show your support? Thanks again for listening, and now on with the show. We are back with round number 2. Everybody, Lin included, D20s to the ready. Let's see who gets initiative this time around. And
big money, no whammies.
If you wind up with the last question, that's going to be killer. So that's, yeah. Let's say I got a 6 this time around.
11.
13.
All right. So Glenn is going to start round 2, but then Lin, you'll go after that. And then Lunica, you'll get the
not expect to win with a 13, but that's okay. Lin won with a 12 last round.
We've been playing a lot of Star Trek lately, so I think our dice are just still in Star Trek mode. So we need to get them back into so that's, But all right, Mr. Myers, launch us.
As I was digging into your work and Rascal News and all things about you to get ready for tonight, one of my absolute favorite things that I read that you've written was an article that you wrote called A Link Between Genders, Trans Joy and the Legend of Zelda. And
that's a good one.
I got to tell you, going through that article, it opened my eyes to more things about the Zelda series of titles that I'd never specifically thought about, but they were important to me too, because I loved how non-specified Link was. Like, everybody could relate to him, and that was, it turns out, very much part of the game designer's design. Even if they weren't going all the way towards the concept of trans, they wanted the character Link to be gender ambiguous so that everyone could relate to them, which is fantastic. And reading all of the stories of how people connected to that while they were going through difficult times in their lives and trying to sort out not just who they were, but all of the social pressures and everything else that came with it, it was really moving. And we've interviewed a few people over the last couple of years that have brought a lot of trans and LGBTQ care and respect and representation to the tabletop role-playing space that I've really loved talking to and interviewing. Just already knowing how you feel about it just from having read the article, I'm going to ask the question anyway. My question is, how do you think that the concept of role-playing, whether it be in an actual live setting, sitting down and playing a TTRPG, or role-playing through a video game, how important do you think that is to, and it doesn't just have to be to gender, but just to development and kids and young people and even young adults as we're trying to discover ourselves and sort out all of those things in a more safe environment?
Yeah. This is something that I could talk about for hours, because
I didn't go with it as my first question on purpose.
This is something I could talk about for hours. Right. So I think that you mentioned like a safe space to play. That's really important, because so often we are told that we have to know who we are, and we have to, even if we're not like told we have to know who we are, it's just like when we're in the world where we're expected to know who we are and understand our place in the world. And then if we go into the kind of like the safe space, like the safe container of play, where we are told like your imagination is much more important than the rules that you have set for yourself in the real world. And when you give people permission to play and permission to experiment, they can also get permission to take things back. So one of the ways that I found out that I identified as non-binary and transgender is I was playing characters that were men. And I was playing like boys, and then I was playing like non-binary people, and then I was playing girls, and then I was like, oh, I'm comfortable with all of this, but I really like playing boys. What's that about? Why is that happening? But it was one of those things where I was able to go in and out of those different experiences because play is experience. Play is still our life experience. Even if we're sitting at a table, even if we're sitting in front of our Steam Decks, those are moments where we're still introspective and we're still human beings collaborating with the world to build out this experience of ourselves. And play, especially like role-playing games and tabletop games in particular, allow us to really inhabit those moments where we can play into an outside expectation of what we are and then come back to a safe container. And then go out and keep exploring the ways that we are questioning who we are, which is not something that we're necessarily encouraged to do in the real world or when we're interacting with other people. So I think play as an experience where you either have structured rules or like less structured rules, like the more rules you have, the less play it is. I have so many thoughts on play, but having that kind of like safe container where you can experiment and then where you can be like, just take it back is so important and so cool and allows you to just, again, more fully understand yourselves, more fully understand other people, empathize. Like it's the relationship building that you do not only like with yourself, but with other people when you have these moments where you are not yourself, but you are still putting yourself into this person. Really powerful, really important. And I think experimenting is so crucial to what humans are. I think the like curiosity is one of those intrinsic human things that we don't necessarily encourage a lot of in our day-to-day lives. But when we're playing and when we're in this safe place where we can be curious, we can ask questions, we can not only question other people, but question ourselves and be wrong, I think is really very freeing in a lot of ways. Also, there's this theory called the infinite game. I'm not going to get into it right now, but it's good. And it basically says that when you are playing, you have to have the option to stop playing. And if you don't have that option to stop playing, you are basically trapped. And it's a theory that applies to capitalism and also prisons. It's very good. And then there's also another, check it out. Yeah, and then there's another theory of rituals and why rituals are intrinsic to society, and how the ritual of getting coffee with your friends every morning, or the ritual of going to church and performing the Psalms, or the ritual of, fast during Ramadan together as a family, all of those rituals serve to create social ties with each other. And the table, the gaming table, is also a ritual where you have to come into the table and you have to ritually agree to follow rules that feel arbitrary but are written in some book somewhere. And you go into the table and you go out of the table, but you still have the consent to leave that table because you're following these ritualized rules and you've opted in to being a part of this ritual with other people where it's playful and engaged. Anyway, yes, it's important. It's important to play.
That's the coolest thing I think that's the coolest way I think I've ever heard role-playing games described. First of all.
That was a fantastic
That's
answer.
Freaking brilliant.
I could go on. I'm stopping myself, but
the other thing I wanted to share with you, and I'm not sure if you have seen this yet, and I am going to date myself a little bit because I have a child who, not in that way. I have a child who is old enough to have watched Blue's Clues when they were younger, and Steve from Blue's Clues did a commencement speech this past weekend, and to the point that I wrote down a quote from his commencement speech. Because, as I said at the beginning of the show, and as folks, listeners know, I have a 17-month-old daughter who is amazing and wonderful and all those things. But the quote was that what children do is stare into the great unknown and ask it to play. So I encourage you to do the same. Arm yourself with play, because when you did that as a child, that was your work and your payment was growth.
Oh, it's good.
Isn't that like the best quote ever?
It's good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So good.
Josh,
As you were talking, I kept wanting to go get my wife and bring her into the conversation. She's an early childhood education teacher, and she has talked to me so much about learning and growth through play and what play needs to be and what it doesn't need to be. And she has expanded her theories beyond early childhood education, but I'll have to make sure she listens to this episode.
I love that quote.
Yeah,
that was a great quote.
I absolutely love that quote.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I think that's a much more succinct way of saying what I was trying to say about like the exploration of yourself and like the ability to be curious, maybe not about the world, but about yourself and about other people and like what the stories other people have to say. Like you have to be curious about what other people want. Anyway.
A whole other topic. I could go into curiosity, but we're not going to go there. Lynn, is actually your question, so let us.
Your turn.
There you go. Torch is yours. Have at it.
But yeah, did you know games are good? That's not my question, but games are good. Let me think.
That's what my question was. It just had a lot more words to it. Yeah.
Did you know games are good? That's a good question for you guys. What's the first thing that you guys do when you start designing a game?
Sweat.
No, I think I'll hop on this. The very first thing when we decide that we're going to do a project, the very first thing that I start doing is just like blind writing, like just writing down whatever's coming to mind, writing down things about the TV shows or movies that I've watched or ideas that I've had. I sit down and write pages and pages and then forget about it, put it aside and then don't look at it. And then I'll go back to it and be like, okay, 98% of this is going to be abject bullshit, but something in here is going to be good. Something in here is going to work. And then look to go ahead and see what happened in there. So that's my process, but I'm also, yeah.
I'm going to preface this answer by saying that it all depends on where the inspiration for the game came from. That makes a huge difference. Like I've got a tile-based board game that's been simmering on one of my mini back burners for a while now, ever since I played the board game Night Cage, which is fantastic. It's a completely randomized dungeon crawl experience where you only have a candle, so you can only see the space you're standing in and the spaces the passages lead to. And every step you take, once it's out of your light, it disappears. So even the path behind you is changing, right? Since I played that game, it's inspired the concept of something much more complicated that's growing. And that's very specific because it had a trigger. But when it's, okay, this is our big general idea, very much like Josh, the first thing I'm going to go to is idea generation of some form. It could be listing, it could be free writing. Once I got a few concepts down, it often turns into a graphic organizer to see how many more things I can come up with for the different individual points and then how they can connect to other points.
Yeah.
And eventually, once I have something of a picture or story going on for the game, picture with story, because it needs both, I start trying to create mechanics that will support it.
For me, I think I have probably the most divergent process in this regard. For whatever reason, I was blessed when I was very young with an eidetic memory. I just remembered everything that I ever saw. For whatever, my weird brain at the time worked more on what I read. If I read something, I knew I could always picture it. And it's weird. I see the picture of the page that I read. So when people would ask me questions like, where was such and such a quote? I could give them the page number, the paragraph, even the part of the sentence in the version that I read it in. That's how my brain worked when I was very young. Somewhere around concussion number 8, I lost my eidetic memory almost entirely. But that ability to picture things was always there. So now when I try to recall those details in my vision space, I see this cloudy picture of the exact thing that I want to recall, but I can't clear up the image. That's how I see things. Whenever anybody asks me, hey, do you remember that thing? Or do you remember this? I am literally looking at when I last saw that in writing, and I cannot clear up the picture to be able to gather that information. Very frustrating, very weird. But because I had that when I was very little, I never learned to take notes, never wrote anything until after that period of time. So what I have I consistently have these images of things. Like I would go a place, see a staircase, see a building, some architecture, and I would envision an adventure in that space. So I don't write from the perspective of mechanics first or even story per se, but I am always seeing the scene. So for me, I start with the scene. I have a place and a moment in my brain, and then I build everything around that. Basically start at that point and build back, basically starting with the one part of the image I can gather and expand back is really my process. Towards that end, I just take notes and write everything. My dear friends here on this show are so frustrated with the amount of times I send little Facebook voice things like, hey, I just saw this. And because I may not have the ability to write that down, I will literally record my voice saying the words. So it's somewhere. And then later on, I'll just remember I put it in a chat somewhere. So I will just dig for it to find it at a later point. I will send notes. My wife is frustrated because I do that all the time. I send her things. And I may not need it for years, but I will go back in the chat to find it because I don't delete chats. I don't delete texts. I don't delete anything like that because I know it's there and I will eventually be able to find it.
This is madness.
That's pretty much, that is how my weird brain works.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating for these guys. They are doing some Lord's work somehow.
So for me, when I'm doing game design, I tend to do a dump doc, and then I go in a straight line, and then I go back, and then I go again, and then I'm like, oh wait, I have to change this one thing. So I just keep doing that for like game design. But for fiction writing, I usually have that one scene. I'm just like, this is the scene that the whole book needs to lead to. And then I outline around, I write that scene, I outline around the scene, and then I write the book.
Yeah. So do you often know where that scene is going to be in the story? Do you know, oh no, this is like the end scene and now I need to write 250 pages to lead up to it or something like that?
It's usually closer to the front of the book. It's usually one of those scenes that's, oh, here's the incident. Here's like what makes this character click.
Yeah.
And I think it's that moment where I'm just like, oh, okay, like I understand this character fully at this moment. I'm going to follow this character through their journey.
Nice. That's cool.
Nice.
Cool. I can totally relate to that when it comes to fiction writing. I've even tried my hand at screenplay writing a couple of times because I envision scenes. And so I've written out the scene and then I'm like, okay, if I was trying to make this into a movie, what would come next? And I can't say that I've ever successfully published a screenplay, but I've put a few things together. So but I can totally relate with starting with a scene and then fleshing out to everything else.
Yeah. Cool. Lynn, I want to take it back to Rascal a little bit here. And again, I had made allusion to this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but also very much not, that you very much and Rascal have your finger on the pulse of the tabletop role-playing game industry in a way that Bell of Lost Souls and other big-name TTRPG sites don't, because you're of the people, right? So I want to know...
don't anymore since y'all left.
Well, right, exactly, yeah.
They screwed up.
I want to know what you, and maybe even as a bigger whole Rascal, thinks is the next big thing that's going to come about, right? Like we've heard about the revision of D&D 5. We've heard about Tales of the Valiant. We've heard about Daggerheart. We've heard about MCDM products. We've heard about everything going up on D&D Beyond. Blah, 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 blah. All these things. We've heard about the Wizards of the Coast VTT. What's going to be the next thing that comes out that makes all of us who are just fans of the genre of TTRPGs in general go, whoa, that's really cool?
I think we're going to start seeing more role-playing games that are more like LARPs. That's my
Tell me more.
prediction.
Yes, I love it. I love it.
And
Ludic and I met at a vampire LARP, so yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more role-playing games that are not necessarily high fantasy. I think that people love lore a lot, but I think that people are really interested in games like, for example, the Triangle Agency or the Zone, where it's like this sort of like a supernatural focused mystery rather than this like massive fantasy world. So that's my guess, is that we're going to start seeing role-playing games instead of being, I think that if I'm right, this is a long shot, but I see role-playing games instead of going from how like 10 or 15 years ago, we had OSR games, so we had story games, right? And that was like the big division of game design structures at the time, what people focused on. I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see people focus on role-playing games that are a lot like board games, and we're going to see people focus on role-playing games that are like LARPs. We're going to see that kind of change happening.
So what would a role-playing game that is not a LARP but looks like a LARP look like?
I think it's one of those... It's hard to say. I think it's one of those games that like encourages you to really experience the game with an immediacy that is not necessarily bound to a character, where you are playing the game more so than like you're playing a character in the game. Not necessarily like an escape room, but have you heard of Jubentia in China?
No.
Jubentia is like it's right now it's one of the most popular hobbies in China among young like millennials and Gen Z. And it's basically LARPing where you're trying to like a murder mystery LARP. And I think we're going to see some of that seeping into the West more often. I think we're going to see people experimenting with how they create games that allow people to be a character rather than play a character. Because I think that we are interested in understanding the experiences of play as like a cult, like as a design culture. I think where the industry is interested in that.
I love that answer, and I am truly grokking what you're saying, because some of my earliest experiments with role-playing outside of this is D&D, this is a module, or this is the game world that's provided was with Glenn and friend of the show, Marty Napier, and several other of our crew, designing characters that were effectively us if we, like the kids in the D&D cartoon, got dropped into Greyhawk or what have you. Mm-hmm. And what that means, not rolling stats, but picking stats that match what we are like. And then what are the actual real world skills we have versus, and how does that reflect in the D&D game? I think it was 2E at the time, but it was kind of like we did that. And then years later, when D20 Modern came out in the early aughts, I remember a very good friend of mine started playing a D20 Modern game where I ran it, but it was we all make ourselves in the D20 Modern game, built up our heroes, did the exact same thing. And I created this fantastical story. I think I based it on the old Voyagers television show from the 80s, where an Omni ended up with the four of us, and we were going through various points in times doing different things using the D20 Modern game and all the various modules that they had, past, present, future, and all that. And so we did that. I like a lot of these modern games. I play a lot of Star Trek. Not that I dislike fantasy games, but I'm very interested in how humanity, vis-a-vis me, is impacted and reflected in through the course of these games. So I totally grok that shift in the way things go. It's one of the things that drew me to Vampire the Masquerade, not necessarily the first character I was asked to play, which was a huge bad guy, terrible thing, but the two characters, the two main characters that I played in any other games, Josh ran one of them in his Darkness Down East game, Rashad the Dog Dawson, a werewolf I played, and the character that I played in another game, Quentin Marcus, those were deeply reflections of me, like deeply reflections of me in so many ways that I probably put more of myself into a game. Yeah, I probably put more of myself into those two characters than I would feel comfortable in this day and age putting myself into a character for a game. I really exposed a lot of who I was through those characters and exercised a lot of issues in the role play of those characters to some extent. And I really like that answer because that really rings true to me as the types of games that I like to get into, the types of games and the types of tables and the table spaces that I like to have created when I play, and I like to give room for when other people play. I don't enforce it per se, but I certainly make room for people to be able to do those types of things.
Yeah.
I think that we're already seeing signs of exactly what you're talking about in the tabletop role-playing space in general, because one of the key differences between the table and a LARP is it's a whole lot easier to step away from the table than it is to fully step out of character in a LARP. You're more in it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But even at the table now, we're bringing in all kinds of things for immersion,
Yeah.
from scents to smell moldy dungeon to music and sound effects to set the mood, even played at live games, to showing up to in-person games in character, full cosplaying. Right. All of these things are growing and becoming much more common just in the space already. So yeah, I totally see where you're coming from.
If people don't think I'm looking for a road bacon candle so I can play at any of my home games, they are highly mistaken. I will find that candle.
You nearly snaked me on that, Leonika, because I was going to say, so the next session of this D&D game that I was talking about at the beginning of the show takes place in a cave that's full of myconids, so like mushroom people, that is notoriously sulfurous. And if you don't think that my ass went out and bought a candle to go ahead and burn in my game room so that when they're there, they smell something mushroomy and sulfurous, you do not know me very well, because of course I have done that.
Of course.
I wrote a whole blog recently called "Stop Trying to Make Me Smell My Game."
I actually read part of that one. That was one of the things that I read. And I agree, because I'm very scent sensitive. I couldn't sit in a room that was lit by a scented candle all night and play. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole point of that article is like making fun of me. Me, Linda. It's not making fun of anyone who uses immersion techniques. But it's mostly making fun of Linda's getting so bad at this dumb candle company. Why? And of course, it leads into some discussion of immersion and how I don't like immersion very much. It's not something I enjoy, because I want to feel like I'm actually creating a story rather than I'm in a story.
Yeah, you want the detachment. Yeah.
I'm obviously
there's
attached to
different
those
players
characters.
for every game.
Right, there's different players for every game. But the main point of that article was to make fun of me for getting so bad.
Yeah.
About the silly little candle thing. I'm just I'm the butt of the joke at the end of this vlog.
Mr. Miller, I think it is time for you to go ahead and the rear here. Yeah, we got one more question.
I'm going to bring this question to something I promised in our pre-show that I would talk about. And for those in our audience who don't know, and shame on you, audience members who don't know, but we're going to fix that tonight.
There's no shame. No shame is cast.
Linda, you have worked on and created more than a few games, and among the titles that you've created, I just want to know, what's your favorite? And there's a secret bonus question here. What TTRPG projects are you working on currently?
So I really like designing games. I really like writing games, but I find that in my capacity as a journalist, I don't feel like I can ethically promote my work or ethically really talk about it in public, because there's this kind of dividing line where I'm supposed to report on this industry and not necessarily be a part of it. There's this idea that I'm one foot in, 1 foot out. So the way that I navigate this, and I don't know if I'm doing it well, is I post all of my games on itch and I don't tell anyone I've done it. I'm just it's there. Sorry, guys, don't talk to me about this. But yeah, so it's an interesting place to be in. My favorite game, I'm actually currently working on a game right now that I'm really enjoying, but I'll tell you about that later. My favorite game that I've ever made, I think the one that I really like is Who Will You Save, Who Will You Serve? It's this 2-player game about Enkidu and the the holy prostitute that was sent to depower him, right? If he has sex, he'll suddenly be not super powerful anymore. So it's about this, but then they fall in love. So it's this very intimate game of navigating consent and understanding and loyalty. And it uses cards, playing cards. So it's really experimental and weird. And I don't know if it works. I don't know if it's a good game, but it's a game that I really like. And I think that there's some interesting ideas. I'm just yeah, I don't know if I did a good job designing this game, but I think that there's some interesting ideas here. And I think that there's some interesting game design thoughts. So that's why I'm proud of it. I also really my most recent game that I published literally 2 years ago is called Marrow. And it's about how you're a mermaid who wants to be human. And it's obviously about being transgender, but it's also about wanting to be something that you're clearly not. And trying to figure out how to be the thing that you want to be. So that was a fun one too. What am I working on? I was a contributor to Inevitable, which was the Haunted West Arthurian game. So that's coming out soon. Very excited. I submitted an item, a magical item, which I'm really pleased with. And I'm working on 2 big projects that I can't talk about. And then I'm working on a personal project called Burnout, but who knows if that's what it's called. But it's basically based on like John Wick and Atomic Blonde and Old Boy and Monkey Man. It's basically about this one person who's driven to do really extreme things very like voluntarily in weird ways, who has made the choice, this is actually important to me and I'm going to do it. And so it uses the metaphor of someone just like busting through all these bodies as a metaphor for burnout, like work burnout. I'm really excited about it. It's going to be a solo game. I'm very pleased with how it's going. It's probably going to use tarot cards, which I'm also like really interested in, and use statistics. I haven't figured it out. It's one of those things, again, I think I mentioned, like I go 5 steps forward, 2 steps back, 6 steps forward, 5 steps back. And so I'm like in the middle of that process. But yeah, I'm really interested in this sort of idea that you could stop at any time. Maybe you should stop, actually. You are bleeding from multiple places. You can't keep going. And then you just decide to keep going anyway, even though you know that you're hurting and you know that you need to heal and you know that you need to rest, and you just keep going. I'm like, interesting. I wonder what this is like. It really
sounds like you are listening in on conversations that Josh and I have from time to time when I'm like, Josh, I can't do this. And Josh says, look, if you need to hear from me, take that time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So exploring that idea, and then exploring the idea that like you never actually really recover from burnout. You just have a scar. And I'm like, scars are still harm. Like scars are still indicative of you have been harmed somehow. So yeah, just experimenting with that, with those thoughts, and how to gamify that, and how to gamify that sort of glorious bloodshed that so often accompanies those films, where you will be destroying all these bodies that are basically being put in your way, but also you're going to be destroying yourself. They're all you, actually.
It's like a short story, and a person dies and goes to heaven, and they meet God, the God that's there, and they're doing all the I just died things kind of thing, and then God is like, okay, it's time for you to go back. So who do I get to go back? I didn't realize reincarnation was the thing. Like they were right, I guess, all these times. What do I go to go back at? He says, oh, it doesn't matter. You may be a million years ago. It may be a million years in the future. Who knows? It's all random. And through the short story, what the person realizes that they are and have been everybody on planet Earth at all times.
Yeah.
But basically it's been a training experience for them. So they've been the most horrible and the best people. They've been the smartest and the worst. All that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, total nonsense.
That's trippy.
So you're right. It is. Yeah, it's crazy.
My head is warping.
Yeah,
in all the best and worst possible ways simultaneously.
That's probably a proper note to go ahead and wrap up on then. Right now that I've broken everyone's brain. Yeah. Anyway, Diana Jones Award-winning Lin Codega, thank you.
Oh, I didn't win. I'm a loser.
Oh,
I'm
loser.
The Diana
never
Jones
mind. I'll strike that then. Yeah.
Loser.
Oh,
it's okay.
I could have sworn you won.
Proud loser.
You did win an Emmy. That's true. Yeah,
They did win an Emmy.
They
did win an Emmy.
An Emmy award-winning Lin Codega.
Yeah, exactly.
I lost. To be fair, I lost to a very good game.
Yeah.
And Connor and I are friendly, so it's fine. I'm just like,
in any case,
you can take this one.
In any case, thank you very much for coming on with us tonight. Where can anybody who listening to the show here who wants to catch you or Rascal or anything like that, where can they find you?
The best way to find me and keep up with what I'm doing is at Rascal News. The URL is rascal.news. If you run into a paywall, don't worry. There are a lot of free articles. You just have to sign up via email at the $0 lurker status. So please, it helps us so much. If you are just like a member of Rascal, you get all of our emails, and we only send 2 a week. And that's only if we remember. Sometimes we forget a lot. But we have new stuff every day. So rascal.news is the best way to keep up with the journalism I'm doing. And if you're interested in me as a person, I'm flattered. But Twitter, at Lin Codega, LINCODEGA. That's it. That's how you keep up with me. Rascal.news and at Lin Codega. I'm not a complicated person.
Awesome. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time. Let's see what is on the show next week.
And a great conversation too. Thank you so much.
Fabulous. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love conversations that like go like an hour and a half, but really could go like another 3 hours. This is my kind of episode. Let's see here. All right, next week on the show, we're going to begin our next game feature. We're bringing back friend of the show, Jay Moores, to talk about his game, Fae, which is a game that we'd played on the show a couple of years ago. He has made some modifications. We're going to be playing a different sort of game, although oddly, with the amount of violence that was in this game session, not unlike the first one. Yeah. But yeah, so Jay Moores will be back on the show next week, talking about Fae with an actual play coming after that. So excited to be trotting that out for y'all next week. So anyway, Lin, thank you again very much for joining us this evening. Appreciate it.
Lin, thanks again for taking the time to speak with us. This was, in the course of a podcaster's life, there are certain moments that they just really look forward to. And no part of this conversation tonight disappointed. Thank you so very much.
Thank you guys. Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you guys so much for letting me on and letting me ask you guys a couple questions.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That was a fun turn of events, especially and definitely not the first time we've had a guest asking us questions in initiative order, but the first time that the guest had the first question.
Yeah. That has never happened before. So that's
with a 12, no less.
Yeah. That's sometimes the way the dice roll.
These guys, this is great.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for listening. And like I said, we'll be back next week with Jay Moores and Faye. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you then. Have a good night.
Have a good night, all.
I'm waving.
Thank you for joining us. This has been Tabletop Journeys. We would love to hear your feedback on our show today. Join us at www.ttjourneys.com, where you can subscribe to the blog to leave comments and see all the content that we publish beyond the podcast.
You can also stay in touch by subscribing to our Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram at TT Journeys, joining our Facebook group, Tabletop Journeys, or by sending an email directly to podcast@ttjourneys.com. Our full episodes come out every week on Friday, and every Tuesday features actual play and gameplay showcase episodes. Looking for early access? You can support the show and get episodes before everyone else at www.patreon.com/TT Journeys. Check it out today and see all the awesome benefits we bring to our supporters.
Lastly, if you're listening to us on Stitcher, iTunes, Podchaser, Spotify, or Audible, we would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to the podcast on that platform. Thank you for listening and for being a part of our growing community. And we bid you fair tides, friends, for legends await.